Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host, Mark Ronich.
And Rabbi, we have a very special guest with us today, someone who I've wanted on the show for such a long time, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, Richard Hartunian.
There you go.
And so welcome to the Jewish View. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Thank you.
And we were just talking about how many connections we have, and so our circles have sort of come close, but But I found something very interesting online about you. It says Richard Hartunian was slated to be the next James Dean in Hollywood. He starred in Hot Rod Rubble. Is that you?
Sadly, that is not me and no relation to me.
But you know who I'm talking about. Okay, so there was Rich, an actor with your name.
Rich, I want to start from the beginning. There's so many layers of government. There's city, there's county, there's state, there's federal. Exactly, what is your position? I mean, again, what crimes or what are you...
So we have, as you pointed out, many layers of government. I represent the federal prosecutor's office. I'm the United States Attorney in charge of one of 93 federal districts in the country. Our district is called the Northern District of New York.
Where does it take from?
It encompasses about half of the state, most of the upstate and central New York region. We have offices in Syracuse and Albany and Plattsburgh and Binghamton. And that generally kind of outlines where our district is. We go up to Watertown in the northwest quadrant of our district, down past Syracuse to Auburn. Our southern tier is Broome and Tioga County. And then we come up to Ulster County and all the way up to the Capital Region and north to Plattsburgh and beyond to the Canadian border.
Do you go as far west as Sullivan County?
Well, that's would be
Southern District.
Southern District.
So how far west Ulster, and then that's it?
That's
just
it.
Ulster.
Right,
okay.
Ulster. Yeah.
So you don't do Dutchess either.
We don't do Dutchess.
Okay, so
right.
they carved out that one county.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
Okay. So it's interesting what people
yeah.
think of upstate and what people think of as the
the Catskills is upstate.
Well, so it's a very large geographic area. Yeah.
Is Delaware County in your catchment area?
Southern tier.
Right, but Delaware's like borders.
You're
Broome.
Testing me now. I've got to get my map out.
All right, I'll find it in my notes.
While you're looking that up, so what would be I don't know if there's a typical crime.
Yeah,
but
so
what would be?
So we prosecute federal crimes. So federal crimes sometimes coincide with state crimes. Drug crimes are an example of that. We have a robust narcotics prosecution program, and we prosecute violent crimes. We prosecute, of course, terrorist-related matters. We prosecute crimes involving the internet and child exploitation. A whole host of crimes, really.
But you have to go across state lines, because one of my 10 jobs is I'm a prison chaplain in the state, and there's surely a lot of I think the majority are drug crimes. But you say drug crimes.
So right, not all drug crimes. We have a federal prison up north in the Lake Placid region, Raybrook, and we prosecute crimes that arise out of that federal enclave, if you will. We don't typically prosecute drug crimes in state prisons. The state authorities handle those things, and we have to have legal jurisdiction before we can come in and get involved in a case. And we work, importantly, with our state and local counterparts so that we don't duplicate efforts. That's an important part of our work as well. So we talk to them a lot, we communicate with them, and we work well together.
And I think the last time I saw you was at a symposium about drugs. And the drug czar, who's from Columbia, he's from this area.
Correct. Mike Botticelli,
right,
the drug czar. Absolutely.
And you were listening intently to what he had to say. I mean, that was.
So one of the big problems plaguing us is the heroin epidemic, as you know. And this is something that is a problem across the country. Something we've been working at the Department of Justice on with great vigor and earnestness. And we have an approach that involves law enforcement, certainly, significant aggressive law enforcement. So when people are peddling heroin, we're going to go after the suppliers, certainly. We're going to go after people who peddle heroin that is causing deaths across the country and certainly here in our region. And we've been very aggressive about that. But we're also working hard to educate the public about the dangers of heroin abuse and to work in the prevention side of the house as well. So we speak to forums and the young people, and Director Botticelli certainly was heavily involved in that
Is
effort.
it because it's so cheap that it's that it's so widespread this time? Because, you know, if you, I mean this respectfully, I mean, if you watch Dragnet, which is based on true stories, and I'm not saying, you know, it sort of reflected life in the 1970s.
Right.
You know, heroin and opioids were a big deal then.
Correct. So it's clear
and it hasn't stopped.
The prices come down significantly. The drug dealers and cartels that operate in South and Central America and elsewhere are flooding the U.S. markets because they know there's an increased demand for heroin. And the demand stems in large part out of our strong use of opioids. Mm-hmm. And you know, you've heard stories about the vast number of prescriptions that are prescribed by doctors here. We consume just a wild majority of the world's narcotics and opioids.
Are they grown here?
Well,
does it start out here, or is it
you know, the
into
illicit
this
drugs don't. I mean, they're manufactured in Mexico.
Uh-huh.
They're manufactured in East Asia and shipped here typically. But you know, the opioid drugs are what I think are causing a significant amount of problems for our communities, because people are getting kind of hooked on these drugs, and then they're turning to illicit drugs like heroin on the street to satisfy the addiction that is developed. They're really highly addictive drugs. So we've been working with the medical community to help make them more sensitive to, and I think they are, the challenges that prescribing these drugs create.
Is there a connection between illegal immigrants and the drug flow?
Well, that's kind of a broad statement to make. I don't know that you can say that.
Certainly, in other words, if the wall is built, you know, will that stem the flow? Do you have confidence that would stem the flow?
So there's a significant amount of heroin trafficking coming up from Central America and from Mexico. Certainly there are drug cartels operating there, and they are transporting drugs across our southwest border. There's no question about that. So we need aggressive enforcement to address that, to stop that, to uncover those cartels and their activities, and to arrest them and prosecute them. So my colleagues on the southwest border are involved in that effort, and I think, you know, additional resources can only help that effort.
Okay, so let me ask you this about the northern border of New York State, which is under your jurisdiction. You know, I've been up to the Akwesasne Reservation, that their sovereign land. I mean, you can only imagine that there's illegal immigrants and drug flowing across Native American lands that we can't do anything about. I mean,
so we have a 310-mile border just in our northern district of New York with Canada. It consists of land and water. St. Lawrence Seaway is there, and it has, as you pointed out, this Indian reservation, the Akwesasne St. Regis Mohawk Reservation, that creates great challenges for us, because it's parts of it are in the U.S., parts of it are in Ontario, parts of it are in Quebec.
And we're not allowed to patrol that?
Well, we patrol it in conjunction with tribal authorities, so the tribal law enforcement officials are responsive and helpful. Another layer of government, if you will, with whom we interact. And but it creates a challenge for law enforcement. We have to work closely and carefully with them, because you are correct. There is illegal immigration coming through. There is smuggling that has been happening for years through the reservation. Notwithstanding that there are good people there who don't want to see it happen, there are organizations who smuggle all kinds of things through that kind of a difficult area to patrol. And so it's a challenge for law enforcement, but we bring cases there, we do work there, we investigate with the tribal authorities, with the state police, with the Canadian law enforcement folks, the RCMP, the Canadian Border Services. We have to work with all these different agencies to do the best we can to protect that border, which is a very remote border, as you
It is.
know, because you've been there.
Been there, that's right, I have.
But more importantly, the border also contains man crossings, and a very important and busy crossing, the Champlain Port of Entry. And the Champlain Port of Entry certainly is a major transit point and thoroughfare from Montreal to points south, including New York City. And so we see a lot of activity at that port of entry, together with the other ports along our northern border, some of which are unmanned. So we have great challenges there. We've been very aggressive with our immigration enforcement program over the years.
Mark just brought up a point to illegal immigrants, and obviously that's almost like practically every day headlines. My little connection is, I mean, it's little compared to, I'm sure, what the issue is because there had a few Jewish people that went through the Canadian border illegally, and then they ended up in Albany because it's the federal court, so they called me in to, visit them or give them the services in the Albany County because there's no federal prison in Albany. They put them up in Albany, or if they're busy somewhere else. But is illegal immigrants a real big issue for you?
So it is a big issue. Obviously, our border and the nexus between Montreal and New York, with us kind of being in the middle of it, creates the need for us to be very vigilant about illegal immigration. So we see people who have been convicted of crimes who end up back in the United States, and we charge them with re-entering the United States. We see people who illegally enter both at ports of entry, sometimes being smuggled in vehicles, sometimes between ports of entry, and the Border Patrol is very active in the northern tier, patrolling the highways and the back roads. And so we'll see people walk through the woods and being picked up by smugglers and transporters to be transported points south. So all kinds of scenarios you can imagine we've seen, and we see it happen in the wintertime, we see it happen in the warmer weather, and it's a great challenge for us. So we need to be vigilant about it.
So I wanted to ask you if you've ever found tunnels or anything similar to what you find on the Mexican border and the southern border. Do you find that people are building these elaborate tunnels? I mean, it's just not like
I'm happy to say
shovel.
we haven't in the northern district.
You haven't,
but there have been in other jurisdictions, and certainly in the southwest districts, in the San Diego area and Arizona area. That's a big problem, and the Border Patrol has experts actually in tunnel construction and tunnel analysis and identifying and locating tunnels.
Yeah.
So the government has done a lot of work.
Okay. But we haven't found any. So would a fence along the 100+ miles, or what is it, 300
We have 310 miles of border here in the northern district of New York.
Would you
The whole northern border, by the way, is 5,000 miles long.
Would you want to see
So I think that,
a fence up in the northern border?
I think what is most important is for there to be law enforcement that has all the tools that it needs to patrol the border.
Is a fence one?
And I'm not sure that they need to consist of a permanent barrier along the entire border.
Okay.
But I think that we use a lot of manpower and technology and cooperation with local law enforcement, including the Indian law enforcement, tribal police, and others. When you add all of these kind of layers of security together, I think you can have an effective enforcement program. I think that's what we try to do.
About tunnels, I heard that because Israel has a problem with tunnels the terrorists coming from the Gaza Strip, so they had technology to find, it's hard to, radar doesn't go underground. So they found some kind of technology, and they're bringing it to the United States to just even identify.
So that's where we have some advantages, and I've been on tours of the southwest border, and I've seen some of the technology they use, and I'm impressed with it, and impressed with the dedication of the Homeland Security agents who work in these areas. Very difficult work, challenging work, and there are some barriers at some locations. Some locations of the southwest border are very remote and mountainous, and they have other technologies they use. So I think a smart combination of things is
we got something called the Adirondacks that also...
The Adirondacks are, present other challenges.
That's true. Okay, so I wanted to ask you about anti-Semitism, because that's been a real problem with Jewish community centers more recently, but also throughout your your Northern District.
Sure.
So, and by the way, Delaware County is in the
Yes,
Northern District.
right, that's ours,
I did
yes,
find that.
yes.
So I wanted to say, you know, what's your response to it? I mean, we had this other Glendon Scott Crawford,
Yeah.
which is the death ray guy. I mean, could you
Right.
just put all that picture together
So,
for us? And
Would
let
it
us
be
know?
under your jurisdiction, number one?
So hate
Well,
crimes
yeah.
certainly can be federal crimes,
Right.
okay? And that's an area where we're very, very vigilant. We work closely with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and their Joint Terrorism Task Force in some cases, because some of the information that we uncover is potentially terrorist in nature, and so we're very concerned about that and watching for that. Hate crimes, anti-Semitic crimes, these are things obviously that concern all federal prosecutors in the department gravely.
Right.
And so we're always on the lookout for this kind of thing. We have had cases where individuals have expressed anti-Semitic views. Just recent cases, you've identified one. Glendon Scott Crawford was someone who was a white supremacist affiliated person who was seeking to do harm to Muslims, and actually went to a synagogue and solicited assistance to build a device. As it turned out, it was an X-ray emitting device that would irradiate Muslims as they worshipped in a local mosque, and he
this is
intended
at
to use it
Gates
elsewhere.
of Heaven in Schenectady.
So
You
this
didn't
was
want to
a
say that I said it.
So this was a terrible crime, and,
Yeah.
and we worked very closely with our Joint Terrorism Task Force partners and actually investigated Crawford and his co-defendant Fight for an extended period of time, and used a lot of investigative tools that we have available to us, including wiretaps and surveillance and all kinds of sensitive investigative techniques, and we developed a very strong case. The case resulted in a plea by one of the co-defendants, Mr. Fight, who was the one who was building the remote triggering mechanism.
Was it a real thing, or it's?
Well, it was
sounds
something
like
that
some
certainly,
science fiction?
well, it
Do you want
sounds
to
like
find
it.
out if it was a real thing?
It sounds like it, but this was something that, you know, could have caused, you know,
Harm.
significant
Yeah.
harm. And so Fight ended up, I think, with a sentence of 8 years or so,
Really? That's a lot.
and Crawford went to trial, and after a week-long trial was found guilty. His words were recorded and used in the courtroom. They were horrific. The hate that he was spewing was really terrible, and he was sentenced to 30 years recently.
Yeah.
So in Delaware, the reason I was asking about Delaware County is because there's a compound there. You know about this compound?
Do.
Okay, because if you didn't, I'd be surprised. So what is that? It's a white supremacist compound, or what is this?
You know, look
compound?
I guess I don't want to talk too much about particular things, but I will say this: the FBI and our partners are tasked with kind of knowing their area of responsibility well.
Okay.
So we actually travel the district. I told you it's a 32 county
Right.
It's a lot.
district,
Yeah.
which is a very big district, and we interact with people and businesses and law enforcement agencies at the local level who interact with the community. We interact with the community itself, and we learn about, you know, areas that might concern us and might not. And so you know, without getting into
Okay,
detail
fine,
about what
okay,
we do
all right.
and who we do it with,
Okay.
we try to
Fair
be
enough.
respectful of the community. We try to work with the community, because at the end of the day, the community people are who we're trying to protect, and we want their assistance, we
Right.
want their help,
Right.
and we don't want to
Okay.
be antagonistic with
So
them.
I spoke to, at the Sheriff's Association
Yeah.
conference last month, I spoke to the Delaware County Sheriff.
Okay.
And he says, you know, he goes on the property
Yeah.
and they let him look around, and, you know, he hasn't found anything that was too outrageous, but that's my story. I'm not asking you to comment on it.
So,
because
you know,
I
look,
you
you
would
know,
want to, so-
yeah, I mean, without talking about any particular, you know,
Sure.
area or event or group, I mean, you know, just know that our people are very professional, and we work
are,
hard
yes.
to gather information in a manner that's consistent with people's individual liberties,
Okay.
and a manner that can help us do our jobs, which is to protect the community.
Is anti-Semitism on the rise in the Northern District? overall?
Difficult to say. We have had a well-reported large number of threats made to Jewish community centers, certainly in our Syracuse and Albany area and around the country, as recently as just on President's Day.
Right.
So this is something, obviously, that is of a large-scale nature and something that has gotten the significant attention of the federal authorities as well as others, so we're working actively and hard to identify people who do that. That's something that, has been reported. Certainly, there's been an uptick in that kind of conduct with respect to these threats. And, we hear talk about it. I'm happy to say that we don't have a very noticeable increase in investigations that are going on now, with the exception of some highly reported ones where we're actively investigating. But, we're always kind of watching out for this kind of crime. This kind of crime I liken it to terrorist-related activity because it affects entire communities' kind of sense of security and well-being. When there's hatred brought against a group based upon their race or ethnicity or their, sexual orientation, this can be something that strikes fear across a kind of a broad segment of society, and it's something that I think we in the federal government are well positioned to try and do something about. We have
another issue that's probably very big on your table is the state officials. Seems like you're always putting them in.
There's public corruption is another area that we exercise jurisdiction over. Yeah.
So, you exercise jurisdiction. I asked David Soares about this also. I said, why aren't these cases? There's in 35 years, there's 55 cases where legislators have been have left office for one reason or another, mostly corruption. But very few of these cases get prosecuted up here. They're mainly, and David Soares told me, well, they saw what he did with the Alan Hevesi case, and then all of a sudden Preet Bharara wanted the spotlight. So he says, all of them, well, that's what he told me. I'm not saying that you're saying it. So I just wanted to get your take as to why isn't the Northern District taking part in this government corruption?
So, first of all, we in the federal government work together.
Fine.
So we, as I like to tell people, we seek justice, we don't compete for it. So we're one DOJ, and we work together with our brother and sister prosecutors in the Southern District and the Western District and around the country many times. If you look at a lot of the cases, you'll see that the vast majority of those legislators are legislators who live, reside, and work downstate.
Okay.
So while state government is certainly located here in Albany, there's a lot of activity that goes on in other districts, including in the Southern District, Manhattan, and in Brooklyn. And if you take a look at that list of cases, you'll see the vast majority of those legislators are downstate legislators. So we sometimes work with our colleagues in manners that people don't see. B, we bring cases where they're appropriate, and we've brought some high-profile cases, certainly, and we're going to continue to do that.
And when you bring these high-profile cases of government corruption, are they then sent down to the Southern District?
No, I wouldn't say that we send them anywhere, but we work.
Are they co-opted by?
No, I wouldn't say that. Look, the Southern District does great work. They have talented prosecutors. They've got a lot of resources. They're a very large office, so they're able to do to be very nimble in terms of what they can do, and that's helpful to them. And a lot of the conduct, as I said, is focused, as you will see if you dive into that list,
I did.
On downstate legislators and activities, I'm happy to say. So maybe that's good news for...
But like the Amadou Diallo case was too much in terms of making a disruption downstate, so they brought it up here.
Right.
And I'm not sure if that was a state...
So that was a different case, I think.
That was a state case maybe, not a federal one.
Right.
But I'm just saying there are reasons why downstate cases get brought up here because it's
well, sometimes venue gets transferred in cases.
But Chris, I don't know if you could talk about specific cases on government corruption either, but like Chris Ortloff was someone who was found to be
That was a
having
child.
girls-
That was a child exploitation case.
Exactly.
Right. That one case in
And
my
he's
office.
at Plattsburgh,
My
yeah.
my office brought that case.
Oh, you did?
Yes,
Okay.
we did.
All right,
yeah.
Chris Ortloff. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he was a TV anchor on WPTC
Right,
at Channel
correct.
5. So.
Right. So that was a case we prosecuted. Sure.
Okay, so that was good. Okay, I just want to make sure that the,
Sure.
the image is not there, that you're just sort of feeling hurt. You know, your feelings aren't hurt. That Priest's taking all these.
No, not at all.
the
Actually,
headlines
Preet Bharara is a friend of mine, and I think that
So
he
I-
does an outstanding job.
So-
And
So I asked him this question, and I'll ask it to you because you're both U.S. attorneys. But I asked him. I said, when someone is found not guilty, which doesn't mean they're innocent, where do they go to get their reputation back? And I could tell you what he said later, but I wanted to see.
who did you ask this question?
I asked
of?
that to Preet.
Okay, yeah. Where do they go to get their reputation back?
Yeah.
Well, look part of our system requires that if the evidence doesn't measure up, if we don't prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury's required to acquit the defendant.
Right.
And that doesn't happen frequently, but it happens from time to time. And we have to accept that that's the case. I mean, if we bring a case in good faith, if we develop the evidence properly, if we use proper investigative tools, and we put a good faith effort forward and the case doesn't measure up, maybe because it's a difficult case, maybe because there are some sympathies that are going on,
Right.
and the jury decides that it doesn't want to convict, that's kind of a necessary aspect of our system, and we have to accept that. Does it upset the defendant who had to defend the case, certainly, and spend money and see his or her reputation perhaps sullied? That's the case. It's not our purpose in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to sully someone's reputation or bring a case for improper purposes.
Okay.
People say that once in a while. Oh, they want to showboat or they want to do that. We go through very rigorous review of our cases. We have career prosecutors
Right.
on our staff that we work with, that we examine the case, that we review the cases with, and we really bring the considered judgment of years and years and years of professional experience in this business before we bring cases, and certainly high-profile cases.
So I
we're
have-
going to give them perhaps extra scrutiny.
As we're winding down, we only have a few minutes left. First of all, I wanted you to talk briefly about your relationship. I mean, you're a local guy.
Correct, yeah.
So you grew up here. This is only your fourth job. From what
So I actually
and you
started
with
working
Sol
for Sol Greenberg,
Greenberg,
who
yeah.
was just the revered district attorney of Albany County for 25 years. I started in 1990 with him and worked for him for about 7.5 years. I became an assistant United States attorney after that, and I worked in the trenches as a career prosecutor for about 13 years before I was appointed by President Obama in 2010 to be the United States attorney.
And I went up to Sol Greenberg's office one day, and I only went once because I never wanted to go, because there was just papers everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't like computers for some reason.
Well, in
Everything
fairness,
was-
that was before the computer age really
I
hit.
don't think I went up before the computer
Okay,
age. I'm not
okay,
that old.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you very much. But even well into the computer age, he just resisted. He just liked to be able to actually physically go into a file cabinet and flip through.
He did,
And, you know.
and he would do that frequently. He'd go in and grab a file, and he was a wonderful boss. I still remain friendly with him. We had a beautiful celebratory luncheon for him a couple of years ago, and he
Right.
and his family attended, and it was wonderful. And
Yeah.
it taught me a lot. He actually was a wonderful mentor. His chief assistant was a legendary lawyer, Dan Dwyer was his
Right.
name, and he was a mentor to many of the greatest lawyers here in the capital
Well,
region.
I always think of you as being the legendary one on the staff.
Well,
so.
yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to have a great career as a prosecutor.
Right.
I have tried to do good, tried to dispense justice,
So
tried
where
to
are
be
you off
sensitive
to?
to victims.
Where are you off to after this?
Well, that's we're still waiting to figure that out. But I'm as soon as I know, I'm
Just
going to
to
come
try-
back and let you know for sure.
Just it's interesting because I know what Mark's saying, but just making it clear, you're really your job is dependent upon the president, isn't it? It's
That's
just not
right.
like you have a contract for 10, 20 years.
That's right. That's right.
I'm
We're-
just saying it's a funny kind of job.
It's a it's a political appointment, and
Yeah.
certainly we know that when the political parties change, we can expect that our, job will
Right,
change
you know
as
that
well.
going in.
So we know that going in, and so.
What's the salary for the U.S. Attorney?
Approximately.
It's public record,
Yeah,
I
I
think.
think it's approximately $160,000
In that range?
range, yeah.
And so you're going probably into the private sector?
At some point, I'll probably enter the private sector.
Okay, and you're going to stay local, I hope?
Well,
hope.
that remains to be seen. I love
Okay.
it here. My wife and I are from the area. We've raised 3 kids here, and I've actually
is
grown
a-
up in the area.
there is a high
I'm a
turnover.
Niskayuna High School graduate.
There you
so.
go.
I mean, it is a high turnover. You can expect that, President Trump's going to
Well,
appoint somebody else.
we have, there are 93 presidentially appointed U.S. attorneys, several of whom have left office in the last, months and,
They
or so.
wanted to leave or they were told to leave?
No, I think
No.
people just wanted to leave and just kind of move on to other challenges,
Yeah.
and so that's gone on.
Interesting.
And so they're,
Interesting kind of job that you.
it's a great job. It's a great experience. You get to travel the country
And
a bit.
I guess your successor's coming from Syracuse, maybe? Is that
Unclear.
Unclear?
Unclear who my successor is.
Okay.
That's
I didn't quite look that up. I didn't
well,
get that
that's
far, so-
something to be determined by the political process. So that's something that
Okay,
certainly the
okay.
president and the
But-
attorney general, I'm sure, will.
They're not consulting you.
Well, that's okay.
This could be your exit interview.
It's well, not yet.
Not
But,
yet. Okay.
but it's been a great career with the department. I'm in my 20th year with the Department of Justice. It's been really a great honor to work here. And
Wow.
the men and women of the department are terrific, and my colleagues, my assistants, there's nobody more professional, nobody more interested in doing justice, in looking out for the concerns of victims, and in trying to do what's right. And that's really what we try to do every day.
All right, well, keep up the good work and the
Yeah.
best of success in your
Thank you.
future
Thank you.
endeavors.
Rich, only good things. You did a good job, and
Thank
I'm
you,
sure
Rabbi.
wherever you go, that it's going to be a great job
I'm
also.
grateful. Thank you very much.
Okay.